Today on Max Kelly's Vegan Cooking Show, we're going to be making Scali bread. We're going to start by adding 200 grams or about a cup of sourdough starter to the bowl of a stand mixer. The starter is here more for flavor than for leavening, so it doesn't have to be ripe. This is a great recipe to use up your discard if you're just building a starter or haven't used yours in a while. If you don't have a starter, just mix 100 grams each of flour and water, stir in a pinch of yeast, and let it sit on the counter overnight. Next, add 115 grams or about half a cup of lukewarm, unsweetened, plain vegan milk, and stir it together with the starter. Next, we have a teaspoon and a half of kosher salt, a teaspoon of sugar, a teaspoon and a half of instant yeast, and 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. Give that all another stir, then add 260 grams or about 2.5 cups of bread flour. Mix that all together with a spoon or your hands until just combined, then cover and let it rest for 15 to 30 minutes. This step isn't completely necessary, but it gives the flour a little time to fully hydrate and makes mixing a bit easier. Attach your bowl to the mixer and mix on low speed with the dough hook for about 8 minutes. You can also knead by hand for 10 to 15 minutes. Even if you use a stand mixer, it's always a good idea to knead your dough by hand for a few minutes just to make sure the texture's right. Dust your work surface generously with flour, and don't be afraid to add more if your dough is too sticky. If you try to proceed with a wet dough, this can happen. Just get to know your dough a little bit. What's your favorite movie? The 1991 comedy horror classic Ernest Scared Stupid? No way, that's one of my favorite movies. Whatever you and your dough talk about, once it's smooth, elastic, and just slightly tacky, place it in an oiled proofing container and let it rise until doubled, about 1 hour. After it's done rising, turn your dough out onto a floured work surface and divide it into 3 pieces weighing about 206 grams each. Roughly shape each piece into a log, then cover them and let them rest for about 10 minutes. You'll also want to mix up a starch slurry. Here I'm using about 1.5 teaspoons of tapioca starch and about a tablespoon of water, but you can use cornstarch instead. Now roll each log into a thin rope about 20 inches long, trying your best to keep the width consistent. Brush each rope with your slurry, then sprinkle the ropes generously with sesame seeds. Roll the ropes around to coat them completely and pick up any excess seeds. Now squeeze the ends of the ropes tightly together at one end and braid the ropes together like so. When you get to the end of your ropes, squeeze the ends together to finish the shape. Now transfer the shaped loaf to a parchment-lined baking sheet. If you're using a baking steel or stone, invert the baking sheet so you can slide it off easily, or just keep it right side up if you plan to bake directly on the baking sheet. You'll want to use a bench knife to unstick the loaf from your work surface, and work quickly using damp hands to help preserve the loaf's shape. Now brush the surface with olive oil. This will help with browning and keep the plastic wrap from sticking. Cover loosely with plastic wrap and let the loaf proof at room temperature until nice and puffy, about 45 minutes. At this point, preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit with a baking stone or steel on the lower middle rack if you have one. Once the loaf is ready, slide it into the oven and bake for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, you can slide out the parchment or just leave it in place if you're baking directly on the baking sheet. Bake for another 20 to 25 minutes until the bread is a deep golden brown. Remove and let it cool on a wire rack for at least a half hour. Enjoy.